Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We have a fantastic show this week with 3 brand new reviews, with all 3 playing in theaters. This week on the show, Long Live the Fighters and the second entry to the Dune story in Dune Part 2. Jack Black returns as our Kung Fu fighting panda in Kung Fu Panda 4. And finally, close your eyes and use your imagination. And while you're at it, imagine a better movie in the new horror film, Imaginary. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch a roar and a bursting of flames. The Movie Wire podcast with just meet people like me. Podcast for hot and trending movies. The Wire. And here we go.
After Poe is tapped to become the spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace, he needs to find and train a new dragon warrior, while a wicked sorceress plans to resummon all the master villains whom Poe has vanquished to the spirit realm in Kung Fu Panda 4.
It is time to take the next step on your journey.
I'm not going to be the dragon warrior anymore?
You will advance to spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace.
Inner peace. Inner peace.
Keep your surf off my turf.
Dinner, please. Dinner with peas in a sesame soy glaze. This is not working at all.
Tai Lung, big fan. Once I possess the kung fu of every master villain, no one will dare question my power.
Not even the great dragon warrior.
Who's that?
The most powerful shape-shifting sorceress, the chameleon.
How do I find this, the chameleon?
I'm gonna lead you right to her front door.
It was against an army!
Then we'll just have to get an army of our own.
What is this place?
The best crooks and criminals live here.
You're a wanted criminal?
You sound surprised. Is it surprising?
Now you kids be careful of those fireworks.
Violence makes our tummies tingle.
Why should we help you? We can take down the chameleon together. Being the dragon warrior, it's who I am. Skadoosh. What do I know about being a spiritual leader?
What is it you're holding?
A cookie?
You were chosen to become something more than you already are.
How should we do this? Quick and painless? Yeah. Or slow and painful?
Slow and painful.
You finally met your match, chameleon.
We're not so different, you and I.
Skadoosh. Stand back. I'm gonna kick my butt.
Seven-nation army couldn't hold me back.
It's been 8 years since the last Kung Fu Panda 3 appeared in theaters and 16 years since the original Kung Fu Panda hit theaters. Now, DreamWorks Animation usually works well when they cap their sequels to, maybe about 2. Anything past that seems to diminish in creativity during number 3. And by the time we reach number 4, it seems like a bunch of disgruntled writers being held at gunpoint to create a script within 24 hours, or Jason Statham is going to come in with a camera crew while abruptly overdramatically setting fire to the room, and then Universal calling it The Beekeeper 2. Either way, Universal will get a movie. Kung Fu Panda 4, just like the other character that got the 4th installment in Shrek Forever After. It feels like a complete and lazy cash grab. It's almost like a studio trying to hold on to the rights of a character. This animated sequel was written by original Kung Fu Panda writers Jonathan Abel and Glenn Berger, and they added a third writer, Darren Lemec, who wrote the disastrous, horrible 4th installment of Shrek, Shrek Forever After. I can almost picture Darren Lemec standing up at the writing table and telling the other 2 writers to, guys, just sit down. I know how to write a 4th installment. Just not very well. Because Kung Fu Panda 4 is as memorable and has just as much heart as Shrek Forever After, which was completely forgettable and lacked any sort of heart. This 4th installment also brings back Shrek the 4th director Mike Mitchell and new director Stephanie Stein. At this point, this is where Mike Mitchell probably stood up, fist bumped Darren Lemec, and said, let's fuck this shit up and make the most generic, should have been straight to streaming piece of animated crap we can. Kung Fu Panda lacks any sort of written and directed heart, any sort of imagination. This is where DreamWorks shows that dreams actually fail. Who would have thought that a movie about a fat, cuddly panda that does kung fu would lack any sort of heart, fun factor, and even humor? This movie plays like an emotionally distant parent that only knows how to awkwardly give you a side hug. Sitting through this movie was like hugging a cactus. Even with the likability and energy of Jack Black, who once again voices our Kung Fu Panda Po, the script he has to work with gives us nothing to really care about. Yes, it's cool to see some returning villains that I'll get into in just a second, but the main problem we have is the story eliminates all supporting characters that help drive our Po character in the first place. But we do add a new character in the 4th installment, and I think I must have jinxed myself with my migration review, where I went on a rant about Awkwafina in animated movies, because once again we get an Awkwafina voice here that doesn't match the character. We get this stealth criminal who acts like a silent thief and a master of her craft, but then the character speaks and we get this.
What did you just call me? Ain't that right, guys?
It doesn't fit the movie. It doesn't fit the character. Awkwafina has become more prominent in animated films than fart jokes. And I'll say it like I said in my migration review. Just because somebody has a natural, unique voice doesn't mean she's meant to be in every goddamn animated film. Now, Po partners with this stealth thief to take down a new threat, the Chameleon, voiced by one of my favorites, Viola Davis, who can capture the power of whoever she comes in contact with. This leaves a window open for a nostalgic blast from the past from previous Kung Fu Panda movies. And to its credit, the last 30 minutes of Kung Fu Panda 4 is fun to look at. It has elements I wish would have transferred throughout the entire 90-minute runtime. But all the cool elements are jam-packed in the climax of the movie, which makes it even more frustrating because I could picture 4 to 5 different directions this movie could have gone to really give it an emotional, fun, clever direction. But the filmmakers were so focused on creating a film that introduces a character, and I think their intent was to make a successful character as we had in Puss in Boots from Shrek, to almost do a spin-off. But our Awkwafina character then isn't interesting enough, nor is she memorable enough to really make me care. I didn't even care to watch this character during the movie. What Kung Fu Panda 4 proves is that it's really nothing without a solid supporting cast of characters. Again, this is Shrek 4 to an extreme level. Animated films require chemistry of characters to really work. To insult a younger audience with generic pieces of crap like this doesn't work, and is the exact problem with animated movies today. Put something colorful on screen, make the characters do silly things, and add in adult passive jokes with familiar characters that once had charm. And ensure that this movie gets released where there's no real competition for family films, and studios will see dollar signs. This week was the Academy Awards where The Boy and the Heron won Best Animated Feature. And I know some of you were rooting for Spider-Man to win, but the one thing I gave credit in my review to The Boy and the Heron was the mere fact that it challenged younger kids to critically think and open up their imaginations. Now, I'm not saying that Kung Fu Panda should have been like The Boy and the Heron or a masterpiece, but rather at bare minimum show a small amount of creativity and thought into something of value or entertainment. This offers none of the above. Kung Fu Panda may entertain some young kids that have recently watched the previous Kung Fu Panda films and may be entertained by pretty colors and an animal that fights on screen and farts. But just like Shrek Forever After, this movie will feel like forever and you will forget about it right after. I'm giving Kung Fu Panda 4 1.5 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
A story of two ladies going south in Ethan Coen's Drive Away Dolls, which took no time to really go south, receiving 2.5 stars. Dig Up Someone Special in Lisa Frankenstein, which dug up all the wrong things and left the good stuff buried, receiving 1.5 stars. The Greater the Spy, the Bigger the Lie in Argyle, which was a disappointing disaster that made me root for the villain for world domination, receiving 1.5 stars. A young woman is brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist in this Oscar-winning film, Poor Things, which is way better than Lisa Frankenstein, receiving 4 stars. They Only Look Like the Perfect Couple in Anyone But You, which was an innocent, smart, chaotic surprise, receiving 3 stars. Plastic is Forever in this musical Mean Girls remake, which for a musical seemed to come across really plastic, receiving 2.5 stars. And finally, The War on Earth Will Be Decided in Space in ISS, which had a fantastic premise, beautiful presentation, but everything else needed to be pushed into the abyss of space and forgotten, receiving 2 stars. Now, before we just jump into the last set of reviews, I want to share with you a podcast that always brings a smile to my face, and that's with my favorite Wilson family over at the Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. Let's hear from them now.
The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast. You know that family whose house you hung out in when you were a kid? The house was a little loud and chaotic, but always fun, and sometimes felt more home than home. Well, that's us.
We're the Wilsons, and we welcome you into our podcast with silly chat, ridiculous games, and interviews with interesting people.
Like a spin doctor. The Super Familiar with the Wilsons podcast.
Welcome home.
A woman returns from her childhood home to discover that the imaginary friend she left behind is very real and very unhappy. From Blumhouse comes Imaginary.
Every culture has a name for it. We call them imaginary friends.
How does it feel being back?
Good. I had such good memories here. Maybe my happy place can be our happy place.
Who left you all alone down here?
It was just my imagination.
I'm playing a new game with Chauncey.
The scavenger hunt list. That's fun.
Chauncey says you're not allowed to play with us.
Oh.
Because you left him. I need something happy.
Something happy. Ugh, that bug's freaked you out.
If I can finish my list, Chauncey will take me on a trip to the place he's from.
Something that hurts.
But it was just my imagination.
You've been spending time with a new friend?
Run away with me.
He asked you to do something that hurt you.
It was part of the game.
Does that seem like a game a good friend would want to play?
Maybe we shouldn't play together anymore, Chauncey. Maybe we shouldn't be friends. No.
Alice! She's lost. But go find her.
It was just my imagination.
Every culture has entities that tether to the young. We call them imaginary friends.
You were always playing with your imaginary friend when
the connection is severed, the entity becomes enraged.
He says he's right behind you.
But it was just my imagination.
Can I hang out with your imaginary friend?
He's not imaginary. He's not your friend.
Now, if there was an example of a script to feel like it was written by AI, this would be it. This is one of the main but many problems of Imaginary. But before I get into that, let me just say, last year, I reviewed a movie called Slaughterhouse about a killer sloth that goes on a murder spree. I gave that movie 3 stars because it knew exactly what it was, and it knew the moments when it was ridiculous and went all in on the ludicrousy of it. It knew how to make the fun factor really stand out to just be a fun, ludicrous horror romp that never once took itself seriously. Imaginary a lot of the times feels like this is what it should have been. I couldn't help this feeling that this was supposed to be more of a horror farce than taken seriously. And that's the route it should have gone. We have countless scenes of our imaginary teddy bear that moves its head, but only between transition shots. We have complete overacting from our cast that tries to come across with their delivery to be serious, but made my theater, including myself, laugh out loud. We have characters that are put in situations that give us the "oh, come on" moment, but the situations feel like it was written over the top to be almost like a B-movie horror comedy. Without giving anything away, we do have a moment in this film where we have a supporting character that acts as a character purely placed to fill holes and move our characters along. This character is Gloria, played by Betty Buckley, who only appears to ensure answers to the lingering questions are answered and to attempt to have this movie make sense. Our Gloria character plays almost like a Elise character from the Insidious films, played by Lynn Shay. But our character of Gloria is portrayed as an unintentional slapstick character. There is a moment where Buckley delivers a line with an overhead shot with her arms in the air shouting her lines. I was in the middle of a sip of water that I had to cover my mouth from spitting it out with laughter. That was unintentional by the filmmakers. It was laughable. It was absolutely a horrible moment for this movie. This moment was so horribly underdeveloped from the character, so over-delivered, and oh so horribly written that I'm sure this will be a pivotal shot that will encourage this film to receive cult status. Where it's considered so bad it's good because of how unintentionally funny it is. Now, the overlaying problem of this film, I would say that this was a vision problem from our director on how the material plays out, where the writers wanted a fun farce horror movie like Slaughterhouse, but the director saw something different. And again, I'd love to say that, but our director was one of the writers. And this lineup confuses me on what the breakdown was. Because Imaginary was written by Greg Erb, who wrote The Princess and the Frog, 1998 Senseless, 1997's Rocket Man, and the more recent Playmobil movie, where he teams up with his writer from that film, Jason Ormond. And finally, our third writer and director is Jeff Wadlow, who wrote Kick-Ass 2, Truth or Dare, and 2020's Fantasy Island. And he was also the director of Truth or Dare along with Fantasy Island. Just given projects from Wadlow from the past, this screams a movie that has fun with its premise. What I saw on screen screams a movie that should have had fun with itself. What I heard on screen from the characters speaking their lines screams to have fun with itself. But our filmmakers decided to go all in on a horror concept solely directed at attracting audiences from young teens with a PG-13 rating. And man, this is the frustrating piece of it, that under the right writers, the right direction, this could have been a gem of possibilities if it really pushed to an R rating. Now, Imaginary, like I said, has some good ideas, and to its credit, did have a twist that I really didn't see coming. There were some surprises to this that I did enjoy, but when it comes to the confusion of what it really wanted to be, the audio doesn't match the video. Its intent was confusing. There was always a lingering feeling that this movie has so many cool elements and a premise that could have been if it just pushed the boundaries. So what we are left with is this unintentionally laughable horror film, and not in the fun way. During the entire runtime, it's like watching creators play tug-of-war of what it wants to be, mixed in with a cast we can feel have no idea what this movie wants to be. So we get a lot of overacting, with the exception of DeWanda Wise, who plays our stepmother Jessica, who does an okay job here, along with our little girl who befriends our imaginary friend Alice, played by Piper Braun. These two do a fine job with their characters and their overall chemistry. But then we have to make sure we add another character conflict, so when the imaginary friend isn't on screen, this one can take its place. We had this rebellious teenager Taylor, played by Tegan Burns, who is placed in the film to appear only whenever the movie feels to lag without conflict. She randomly appears at the right moment where the movie doesn't know where to go, or she just conquers the second half where the movie needs a little jumpstart to support where the movie wants to go for the climax. And when our Taylor character gets more screen time in the second half of the movie, this is where it feels unearned. It feels like it's just placed, and the dialogue feels rushed with her, like it's almost like a superhero diving in and saying, "I'm here to save the day." This character is added into this screenplay overly rushed and simplistic. And as a viewer, we're just supposed to be convinced that's good enough here. Imaginary is a confused mess of what it wants to be, with a premise that could have been so much more. It always hints at something greater than what these writers and director execute on. As a viewer, I could see the utter confusion from our performances. It felt like the cast was being pushed and pulled back and forth from director to writers to follow the vision of the movie that they each had a vision of. I was waiting for a cast to yell for mommy and daddy to stop fighting, or having our imaginary friend Teddy Bear just appear and say, "Fuck it, guys, I'm out. This house is too messed up for me." Imaginary suffers from a complete misfire of communication on vision. The premise is there, the ideas are there, but this was either meant to be a horror farce of fun or a push the limits R rating to really have it explore what the writing hints at what it could have been. But what we are left with is a movie that looks better in our imagination than what we see on screen. I'm giving Imaginary 2 stars. Now, this week, we just got done with a predictable, but at times pleasantly surprising Oscar ceremony. Congratulations to all the nominees and winners. Now, there was a time back in 1999 where a month before the Academy Awards aired, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert broadcast their last Oscar special on screen together, Memo to the Academy. On the newest episode of the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's new show, Back to the Balcony, we dissect our critics' recommendations to the Academy. You won't believe some of these picks. That episode is now live. You can find the YouTube link in the description of this episode. Let's take a sneak peek now.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
So Gene's pick is extremely surprising, and I love it. I don't agree with it, but I love it. It kind of goes against a lot of the things we've heard him say in the past. And like you said, that's part of the sentimental part about it, where he's like, I can let this, veil of pretentious critique go. Like, I don't have much time left, and I'm just going to show people that I can just love film and actors and performances for what they are, and let go of this grouchy, grinchy, grumpy persona I've created over the last 20 years. So while I don't agree that James Woods could have been an Oscar nominee for this movie, I love the fact that Gene stood behind it. Like, it's a real kind of last little farewell and goodbye to the pretentiousness that he wore on his face.
When I saw this pick come out of Gene's mouth, it was a WTF, but watching him explain it and just kind of, like you said, just kind of let the guard down, it touched me a little bit, because even though I hated the movie, watching Gene go over the why and just see him nominate, in my eyes, a bad film almost is enough to bring a tear to your eye, even though I don't agree with it 110%. But I do appreciate him bringing it to the table, because I think what a lot of people, when they bring their opinions to what should have been nominated, they are so scared of public opinion, of what they liked, and it shouldn't matter because everybody's going to have different opinions. And this is a prime example of letting your guard down, not caring about what other people think of what's good and what's award-winning to you. So my hat's off with the movie pick and the bravery.
On YouTube and your favorite podcasting platform, join us.
Sound a little excited, Jane. Sound less excited, Roger.
Paul unites with Cheney and the Freemen while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family in Dune Part 2.
It's okay. I'm here. It's been a while since you've had one of those nightmares. Tell me, what was it about?
It's only fragments. Nothing's clear. You've been fighting the Harkonnens for decades.
Oh!
My family's been fighting them for centuries.
Your blood comes from dukes, then great houses. Here, we're equal. What we do for the benefit of all.
Well, I'd very much like to be equal to you.
Maybe I'll show you the way.
Deal with this prophet. Send assassins.
Fade Rother. He's psychotic.
I see possible futures all at once. And in so many futures, our enemies prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. Allegiance is to you. Do you believe me?
This is a form of power that our world has not yet seen. The ultimate power.
I want you to know I will love you as long as I breathe.
You will never lose me as long as you stay who you are.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Silence! This prophecy is how they enslave us! Prepared for what is to come.
Now, I wasn't exactly kind to the first film in my original review, and when I'm asked what I thought of the first Dune, I'm usually met with the enthusiastic surprise response of, really? You can go back and listen to that review in my previous episode in Season 1, and open and honest, I just downright found the first film dreadful. Even when it comes to the style and visuals, I didn't like it. I found very little value for me as a viewer in the first movie. It wasn't my cup of tea. I recently rewatched the first film before going into Dune Part 2 to see if my opinion has changed. And maybe I would have stretched it to maybe a half a star higher than what I gave it, but my opinion really hasn't changed. I said it then and I'm saying it now. It was a film made for fans of the book, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that also means it's also not going to be a film for everybody, and I was part of that group. After looking at the runtime of 2 hours and 45 minutes of Dune Part 2, I was really dragging my feet into the theater to see this film. And after about the hour mark into Dune Part 2, I noticed something that was one of my biggest complaints from the first film, is that all the characters seem to deliver their lines at the same slow pace, at the same dynamic, and it was hard for me to really get engaged into these characters. Here, there seems to be some uniqueness to the performances that seems like our cast has a little more confidence in the understanding of their characters, especially with our main character Paul, played by Timothée Chalamet, where we see a well-played crescendo of character development throughout the movie that was lacking to me in the first film. Now, that's not to say that the first hour or even the first half of the movie had me sold. The first half of the movie I was pretty solid at a 2-star rating, because the best part of the first half is the visuals, which to me is a big improvement from the first film, especially that absolutely stunning audio and sound editing. Compared to the first movie, between the visuals, the audios, and the way the dialogue is delivered, that seems to drop what the main problem was in the first one for me. They dropped the kind of table read style mixed in with a daytime soap opera style. They seem like they have a pulse go around when it comes to the performances. This is enough to make the first half okay. I had to give Dune Part 2 2 screenings. The first go-around was at an IMAX theater, which was absolutely stunning. But I don't like to consider a specialty screen to base my review on. The second go-around, I saw it at a local independent theater to see where a big chunk of the public would be viewing it. What I was surprised with, even with the independent theater, the audio. The ground still shook with the audio, and even though the visuals didn't pop like at an IMAX theater, understandably, the visuals were still top-notch. But what really sold me on Dune Part 2 is the second half. And honestly, this movie could have easily been 45 minutes shorter if we lost some scenes in this film that really didn't add any value or were improperly paced. Most of these scenes are, again, in the first half of the film. But once we get our Austin Butler character, Fade Rada, introduced as a bald, blade-fighting, black teeth character, once Butler is introduced is when this movie really starts to get interesting and engaging. While I do think his character was a little bit rushed and didn't get a lot of explanation, and I could have used more, while we spend time with Butler's character, we jump from a black and white style scenery with strategically placed colors with his character to switching to the vibrant oranges of the desert, and it's very pleasing on the eyes and helped to really keep my attention on screen. Said and done throughout the movie, my biggest problem with Dune Part 2, which was the same as Dune 1, even though this is an adaptation from a book, that doesn't mean it has to be so structured. What was really missing for me, and is a missing element to have that inclusion from the audience that aren't familiar with the book, was having me take into this new planet, this new world, to have my imagination go wild, to take me to this brand new place I've never seen before. Not just have me wowed by visuals and cinematography. What do the filmmakers do with this environment? We see little glimpses of this with shots of big rocks with caves. We have characters hidden in sand with just a scope hanging out. There's a scene in this film, and I'll leave out the specifics, but we have a shot of a body on the planet's desert, and there are black ants crawling all over this body. I thought to myself, other than giant worms, we see some cave birds, we have ants. Is this the most creative we can get in taking the viewer to a new world? Is just showing sand on ants? Couldn't the filmmakers create a world by adding some unique touches, some other challenges other than the antagonist coming to the desert and shooting? It started to feel repetitive from scene change to scene change, to the point I had to think to myself, okay, we've seen the desert, and every time we cut to the desert, it just seems to be shooting and explosions to add something unique. I wanted the desert to feel like a character in itself by adding that sense of curiosity, maybe some conflicts in the environment, maybe some imagination of wildlife, maybe some uniqueness to the multiple rocks with caves. It's a desert, I get it. It's an adaptation, I get it. But this is also a big budget sci-fi film that I wanted to be transported to a new world. I wanted to be in awe, not just by visuals being shoved in my face. I wanted a reason why to be stunned. Even when we get these scenes with Austin Butler's character with the dark black and white's cold environment, which I did enjoy the style, but at the same time, do I want to go to a sci-fi fantasy to be taken to a new world to get dark black and white scenes? Even though I like the visual style, that doesn't mean it fits into this. I want to be taken to a new world, not with a director trying to show off his sense of style of a director that says, look what I can do card. It's like exaggerating a resume by director Denis Villeneuve, who also directed the first film. Villeneuve also directed 2013's Prisoners and 2016's The Arrival, along with Blade Runner 2040. This type of style that he utilizes in Dune Part 2 may have worked with its effectiveness in 2013's Prisoners, but as we get deeper into his resume and the budgets get bigger along with the audience, Villeneuve really wants to ensure that his directorial style is seen. He is a huge fan of adding colored hues to his work, including the blue hue we see from the first film, and it didn't work for me, especially in the first Dune. The blue hue actually took a little bit of the engagement factor away in the first film, and the black and white here took a little bit of the wonder away from this world, that I really wanted to see the vibrant colors we got from the desert. I wanted to see what visually this world would look like with true color. I get that our director wants to create a separation between our characters from dark to light, but I really wanted something something from this director to give me a sense of wonder and curiosity, and the style just didn't really work for me. And listen, I'm not saying that this was a horribly directed film, because it absolutely isn't. So those that are fans of Dune and ready to riot, you can sit your ass back down and relax. Because a majority of the time, there is some truly great skill here, especially when it comes to our desert planet. The shadows are just right, the character placement is just right. We don't overuse the up-close shots to capture our characters' reactions, but rather when it's necessary. But more importantly, we can tell that our director and cinematographer, Greg Fraser, were on the same page when it comes to capturing the perfect wide-angle shots of the environment. Now, I found the first film a little bit hard to follow at times, and here it does a much better job at clarifying some things. The last hour, after piecing together what I've seen from the first film to the second, I started to understand the character motivations and more of a clarity of what in the actual hell was going on. This is where I really did start to enjoy myself. During the second half, I felt like I was watching a different movie. The dialogue became more simplistic, more detailed explanations, and feelings were expressed from our characters. I felt myself really getting into what was happening on screen. The final act of the movie was my favorite part of the film because, to its credit, it did build some long-awaited tension and convinced me to not care what I was seeing on screen necessarily at the moment, but to reflect on what I have seen on screen to add to what will happen next. Unlike the first Dune that didn't leave me excited to see the second movie, I'll admit that I am curious to what the third movie will bring. Dune Part 2 is fantastic to look at and listen to. That will make some viewers not fans of the book really work to win them over. But the second half of the movie will reward some. It rewarded and won me over and will go into the books as one of the sequels to me that is far superior to the original. Is it still a movie for fans of the book? Yes, but it does wave to the non-fans of the material to come join the party. I'm giving Dune Part 2 3 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And if you haven't checked out Back to the Balcony yet, make sure you do. The YouTube link will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect of those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.